Hi, this is a system that is basically we want to develop, and this is a combination of development of hardware and a software. The product will be called a CIU, so it's called a Central Interface Unit. The job of this CIU is basically to get the data from the field and log that data over here, create one small UI which can be seen either via HDMI screen, so that HDMI screen knows what is there, or it can be also connected via web browser. So it should be having some kind of UI developed inside. So any laptop or computer which connects to it through via some IP setting or some kind of a device where we should be able to configure the CIU. So that is what the user part is. The basic of this system, as you can see from the screen also. So my mind notes are showing it's a basic data acquisition system. The hardware platform can be anything. Primarily, we want the device to be based on Linux because of we don't want any bigger hardware requirements, because this has to be done only for the data acquisition and some kind of a reporting process. So we should have even Raspberry Pi of industrial grade can also work very fine with the Linux operating system. So we are okay with that because this system is going to be used for data acquisition only, nothing else. So we want a very basic system. So either some kind of a edge server we can use, or either we can have a Raspberry Pi, whatever it is, with operating system of Linux or something like that. Now this hardware is going to communicate with the field over Modbus. So that is the basic requirement that we are giving as of now. So data, whatever the data is coming to this hardware will be on Modbus, and it will be in the Modbus TCP IP. Now, just there are some red flags, so that's why we have kept it in the red. So you must be aware. So people who are actually using Modbus, they understand. But still, for a person who has not worked on Modbus, I'm just going to give that the data from the Modbus can be in any form, because we don't have a control of the data coming from the field. The field data is coming in the form of TCP IP Modbus, but the format of that data can be different. So either the words can be in the form of integer, they can be form of float, they can be of double word. So all the three formats have to be configured over here. So we should be have a facility of selecting what kind of the word is that, it's a integer, float, or double word. There is also a possibility of the float. Sometimes some manufacturers, the way they are baking or they are putting the data inside their devices, intelligent devices, and the byte orders are sometimes we have found are inverted. So we should be having the option of changing the byte orders for a float system, so that we get the correct reading. We are able to read those things. There is also a possibility that we may get the data from the field, which is basically it's a serial data of different devices, which are the legacy devices of Modbus. This serial data, there is a possibility that might be coming. This serial data might be coming from serial to Ethernet. So every serial, as you are aware, is having one node ID, or it can be having called a device ID. So there is a possibility of 32 nodes speaking on a single Ethernet. So the software should be able to speak to all of them separately. So we should know node ID 1, node ID 2, node ID 3. So we should be able to use that. So that is the configuration. And if it's only one ID, it's one node, then it's default it remains 1. Next is basically we are going to use this hardware for a tank gauging system. Tanks, these are the name it is, it's a storage tanks. So storage tanks can be for water, it can be for milk, it can be for oil, it can be for gas, whatever it is. So what we want to use this is, we want to use this hardware to get the data from the field, store on it, and then give us some kind of a UI to get some reports and all those things. So coming to the part, we will be having the system which should be configured up to maximum 50 number of tanks. So there is a possibility a single location we might be having 50 devices connected. So we should be able to have 50 tank names to be configured over here. Each tank will be having average 50 parameters. So we should be able to do 50 calls from that particular device. So whichever the device is there, we should be able to get the 50 parameters from there. Third is data logging is also required for all parameters. So it depends. We might be having 5 parameters, we might be having 50 parameters. We should be logging each and every data into some kind of a data log inside the device itself. Frequency of the device, the data logging should be programmable. We should be having a drop down menu, so we can have like 1 second logging, we can have 1 minute logging, we can have 15-minute logging, and we can have 1 hour logging, whichever way we want to do it. So the system should be flexible enough for configuration where we should be able to log the data. We should be able to get the historical reporting for each parameter. So whenever we are connected via any kind of web browser or via standard HDMI, we should be able to pull some historical data. Like I put a date and time, or I put some start date and start time, same as end date and end time. I should be able to get the data out of that thing, and that data should be exported in the form of CSV, either in the form of Excel or either in the form of PDF. So that functionality has to be there with the date and time stamping. Next is there is a possibility of the raw data coming to us, but then we may have to manipulate that data, like dividing by like 10, multiplying by 100, or multiplying two parameters together, like we have a volume and a density, both multiply to get a mass. So those kind of calculations might be required between the parameters. They also constitute a parameter, but the raw parameter or some fixed parameter, multiplication, division, these kind of the calculation might be required. So the system should have functionality to write a sample code or write a sample formula for that, do that. Then since we are working with lot of intelligent devices nowadays, so lot of intelligent devices want this data to be sent to cloud or to be a lot of other places. So the software should be able to have custom HTTPS or API calls, or we should be adding some kind of like MQTT calls over here. So we should be able to send the data to the third party devices over from here. So most of the data formats will be in the JSON, because that is what the latest programming language is normally used with the API calls. So we also want to do the same. In spite of that, you can have the basic programming of the device either in C, C++, even in JavaScript, in Node.js, whatever you like. It's all your choice. But we should be able to get the data out in the form of JSON if required. We also need small basic UI. Now that basic UI has to be kind of a web server inside the device itself, because we are not going to connect any external device to access that. So what is going to happen is we are going to just put a HDMI to this, some mouse, keyboard over there, so that we are able to program this device. We are able to see the parameters, the raw parameters which are coming up, and some screens where we should be able to make it presentable to our customers. So that is the requirement. Last but not the least is we also need third party logging, because this device is very small device. It's going to have small logging footprint. So we might be having like some SSD to be added to this, like 256 GB SSD, nothing more than that. So until we are not having bigger storage spaces, there is a possibility that we may have to add on additional storage space. Now there is a possibility of additional storage either by putting up an additional hard drive. So we should be possibly having a hard drive which should be logging that. And second thing is there is also a possibility that we may not be allowed to put a hard drive into this into our system. We may have to use an additional server which is actually on the Ethernet network server, and that might be having MS SQL, MySQL, or MS Access, or any RDBMS, like either you can call it like MongoDB also, and all those things. You can use that. The idea is to have that particular data logging, which is not possible to keep that data for a longer duration on this device because of the size issues. We can actually move the data directly to some third party storage device also. So this is what we have. We are looking for entire ownership of this complete job to be taken by a single company who can actually develop a hardware, who can also develop a software. We will be needing the complete source code of the hardware and the software programming, the firmware, and all those things. Plus we are going to have an agreement for next 5 years for any kind of developments, upgrades, and supports with the same company. So if you think that you can get me this data done, you can get this data ready for us, please get in touch with me. We will be discussing it more. You can get my email ID, my phone numbers, everything underneath this video. Thank you.